the most successful leaders have the most clarity, and they have clarity in their own minds. And because of that, they can articulate things more clearly to their people, which increases the likelihood of them understanding what they actually mean. The truth is that most don't put in the work to get a great scorecard because it's hard. It's hard work to like really dial those in and really test them out and have the communication cadence to get feedback on what's working, not working. But it's so worth it.
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. I am your host, Keith Norris. Our guest today is Toney. Danny is a business improvement consultant. He works specifically as an implementer of the EOS, or Entrepreneurial Operating System, business management framework. As an EOS implementer, he helps leadership teams turn data into real decisions and real results. He works with growth-focused companies to cut through the noise, build accountability, and drive measurable traction. If you're serious about leading with clarity and using numbers to scale smarter, Danny brings the playbook. Danny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, this is great. This is an episode I've been looking forward to. I know that we've had a number of conversations, and what I want to do first is just have you tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce us a bit, and tell us how you got into this line of work.
The first 10 years of my career was in the financial advisory space. So that's what my dad jumped into after a CPA career. And I worked with him for those 10 years. Part of that I was in college. Part of that obviously was post-college. About a year after I graduated from college, kind of convinced him to break off of the group that we were with and start our own company. The name of that business was Signal Wealth Advisors, and that has since sold to Carson Wealth out of Omaha, Nebraska. I worked almost every job that you can work in a financial advisory firm, not because I'm brilliant, but because I was trying to find something that I loved doing. And I have tremendous respect for really good financial advisors and a lot of respect for the brains behind investments, but it just wasn't me. I kind of gravitated more towards operating the business. So as we were growing our business, we merged in with another company. They came under our brand, and that's when we learned about this thing called EOS. We had not heard about it before, so it came highly recommended from some business owner friends that were running their companies on EOS, and we looked into it, and it was clear that there were some key parts of it that would be really beneficial to us. So we brought it in, and there was a 2-year period from when we brought it into our company and I was operating the business where I just saw EOS firsthand. It was super impactful for us. The strategy of business and, why we're doing what we're doing and how to build a team, those are the things that I thought about instead of insurance and investments and stuff. So after a couple of years of seeing how impactful it was, I thought this would be a lot more fun to do. So I left and became an EOS implementer.
So you started out as a customer or client of EOS and you really liked what they're doing. So you decided that's what you want to do when you grow up.
Yep, that's true. And I'm still trying to grow up.
Awesome. So now when you in your work as an EOS implementer, maybe just for anybody that doesn't know what EOS is, could you just give us a little introduction to what that methodology is?
Yeah, sure. So EOS is a complete, proven, and simple system for operating your business. Sometimes when people hear EOS, they think, oh, it's a cool software. It's a methodology on how to run a great business. There are softwares that support it, but that's not what EOS is. And EOS is really designed to help organizations get really good at 3 things called vision, traction, and healthy. And what we mean by that is with vision, we start with the core leadership group and really work to make sure that we're totally aligned on the vision. And then we also really try to instill discipline and accountability in the organization so that traction actually occurs. And then we focus on making sure the team, the core group of leaders, is truly healthy, where anything can be put on the table and it can be discussed and understood and situations worked out. We commonly say, as goes the leadership team, so goes the rest of the organization. And so EOS does start with the leadership team of the company, but it's designed to be the operating system for the whole organization. And so we work all of those tools into it. The last thing I'll say here, high level about EOS, is we've boiled business down into 6 key components: the vision component, the people component, the data component, the issues component, the process component, and the traction component. And we believe that if those 6 areas are truly strong and healthy and everyone's aligned, everything else is going to fall into place in your business. Things are going to work, things are going to move forward, and you're going to be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
That's awesome. I think that one thing that I find really interesting, I know a lot of the folks that listen to this podcast are involved as working in continuous improvement, a lot of them inside large companies, and some obviously work inside, companies of all different sizes. The types of industries and companies that you work with, tell us a little bit about what some of those are and what kind of businesses you've seen. You mentioned the wealth management, but I know that you've worked with a number of other industries as well.
Yeah. So EOS was designed for the small to medium sized entrepreneurial companies. And we define that as 10 employees to 250 employees, $2 million to $15 million in annual revenue. That being said, there is a wide range of organizations that have adopted EOS, but that's kind of the sweet spot.
And just like anybody who's more familiar with lean and the Toyota production system, there's like some Japanese terms that you have to learn if that's the discipline that you're going to follow. The EOS system has some language and some terminology and rituals and artifacts, you could say. Could you run us through what some of those are and just describe them for us? And then we'll drill into talking about a few of those.
Yeah, sure. So one that's probably commonly heard is our level 10 meetings, or L10 meetings. They're called level 10 meetings because we believe that if you operate this meeting effectively, they can be a 10 out of 10 in terms of effectiveness and use of your time, as opposed to, when I sit down with companies that are looking into EOS, one of the questions I ask them is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being best, how effective are your internal meetings? And most of them say 4 or 5 or 6. Some have been lower. And so the idea is, like, these meetings can be great. So that's a part of the lingo, level 10 meetings. We call our data tool, or one of our data tools, a scorecard. It's similar to KPIs or a scoreboard, or, things like that. Oh, we got rocks, which are 90-day priorities. We operate in a 90-day cadence overall. Issues lists. Let's see here. And then you've got the fancy stuff like RPRS, right people in the right seat, and IDS, or how we solve issues, how we identify the root cause, then discuss to get to the solve.
So rocks, that to me sounds like kind of a takeoff of the Stephen Covey big rocks, like put the big rocks in first. That a lot of people have seen that object lesson where I think of Stephen Covey's the one that I probably saw first do it, where you have the sand and you have the big rocks, and if you put the big rocks in first, then the sand fits in, but if you put the sand in first, the rocks don't fit in. So the idea of rocks is those are your big things that you're working on, and it sounds like in EOS it's a 90-day like time frame. So this is like the big thing for the next 90 days. Is that the idea?
Yep, that's the idea. If you zoom out a little bit, we obviously do 1-year planning, and there's specific goals for the year. There's more of a vision for the 3-year, but yeah, outside of the 1-year planning, every 90 days, the team's getting together, assessing what's working, what's not working. Are we still on the same page? And what are the new priorities moving forward that are going to align with our goals, that are going to get us to where we want to go long term? So, yep, in an EOS company, there really is a pause button every 90 days where things just wait for a moment. It's a day-long experience for the leadership team, but that time and that space is really key to make sure that we're staying on the same page and executing where we need to execute.
I like the way you describe that. It's a pause, it's a time set aside, probably for reflection and setting the next improvement, you could say, the next meaningful improvement. I like that. I think that what you said there is really an important piece of that, the pause. It's so hard to get out of like the daily grind to take that moment and actually think about that improvement. That's a really good insight.
Keith, we
So
call these, just really quick, we call these clarity. So these aren't by definition clarity breaks, but we have a tool or a practice or a ritual in EOS called clarity breaks. And it is that practice of pausing regularly and getting your head out of the busyness to ensure that you truly have clarity. One thing that I think that I've observed, so I've worked with almost 50 different businesses to this point, lots of amazing leaders. And one of the things that I've observed is the most successful leaders have the most clarity, and they have clarity in their own minds. And because of that, they can articulate things more clearly to their people, which increases the likelihood of them understanding what they actually mean. And I think there's a big difference between leaders that are 95 to 100% clear versus like 60, 70% clear. There's a big difference. Yeah, that practice is really important.
now, I one of the areas that I wanted to drill into was the scorecard, and I think the idea of a scorecard, a lot of people kind of makes sense. Is there what kind of things would you expect to see on a scorecard? What are the metrics that belong there?
Yeah. So I'm assuming you're familiar with the leading, lagging idea of metrics.
Explain it for us.
Great. So you have lagging measurables, which, if you think of a process or step by step cadence, those are the numbers that come as a result of doing stuff. So, revenue collected is a lagging number. That's an important number. Lagging doesn't mean bad, it just means it's at the end of the process. And then there's leading indicators that are more associated with the start of whatever process we're talking about. So I think most people resonate, like they understand the sales process. So a good leading indicator for a salesperson is adding a name to your prospect list or picking up the phone and calling somebody. So, like the most basic definition of a scorecard and what numbers to put on it is, if you're a leadership team, what are the 5 to 15 most key numbers that you want to see weekly that will help you know if the business is on track or off track? What I think a lot of people don't see is in EOS, our tool that houses the vision and the plan for the company, it's called the VTO, or the Vision Traction Organizer. There's some really key lagging numbers that we call out on that document, like revenue, like gross profit, net profit, and any other key measurables that are like lagging result numbers. I think the most effective scorecards are the ones that are more focused on the leading activity-based numbers, not only for the company, but the scorecard discipline not only covers the company level, but every team in the organization should have their own scorecard. And what we're trying to create is a scenario where every person in the company has clarity around what's their 1 to 3 most important numbers that they've got to keep on track each week. So, from the sales side, it's like prospects added, phone calls made, conversations or proposals scheduled, or discovery meetings scheduled, or discovery meetings completed. I had a client, they're a retail client, and training was really important for them. So, they sell their products, and their products had some technical aspects to them. And so they found it really important to have regular virtual training experiences with their customers that were buying their stuff. And we were like going through the exercise of, can we really find a great weekly number for everyone in the business? And I said, yeah, I think we can. And they said, okay, well, what about this person? Their job is to make sure that the content for our training that happens every week is really good. So what in the world would their number be? And we kind of broke down on the whiteboard their process and how soon they need to have come up with the content and who needs to be involved in improving the content, all that stuff. And what we came to was the most important number that we can measure, but kind of in a different way for this person is 2 weeks before whatever training they were doing. They needed to have the content approved. So part of their process was generating the ideas of what it would be. It would have to flow through a couple people to make sure they liked it. And then kind of like a lesson plan was put together for what it was going to be. And that needed to be approved, ready to go by the end of the week for 2 weeks out. And that was their number. So it just kind of like, it's this practice of, high level, it's what are the most important numbers for the company. But in the most practical level, it's looking at each person's job and asking if we could measure one thing, two things, three things on a weekly basis that they have control over, what would it be?
So are you trying to connect basically everybody in that department to a particular number that they can have some accountability or ownership of?
Yeah, definitely. Some teams really have like everyone on the team is just taking their piece of the same measurable. But then you have other teams where their jobs are quite different, even though they're on the same team. And so they have their own measurables. But yeah, it's trying to, again, I think a key part of leadership is clarity. And one way to get clear is having to identify the most key activities, and most of them can be measured, to then provide that clarity to your people on this is what is expected and driving accountability to that. And if you're, a company that's fully running on EOS, if the employees zoom out, they can see how their numbers affect other people's numbers and affect the company overall for sure.
And do these numbers, is it just a number that you report, or do you usually like have a target? Like you have a goal each week to try to hit this many of this number?
Yeah, definitely always a goal. That's a very key part to the scorecard discipline. The goal could be, in that example that I gave, the goal could be like one thing is done successfully, or it could be a lot of the same thing. But yes, there has to be a goal.
Target. You mentioned one example. Are there some other examples where like the numbers really, like sales kind of strikes me as one, like it's easy and it's hard, right? Like it can be like if you have something that maybe you don't have a lot of sales every day, you're selling, maybe you're selling something really large, but it's kind of infrequent. So it might be hard on a daily basis to say I didn't sell something today. Then you're talking about getting into more of the lead measures where you're wanting to track more behavioral lead measures. Is that the idea?
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope people don't hear me say 100% of the scorecard measurables all the time in every situation need to be as leading as possible. But the idea is we want to get as close to the leading measures that are also within our control, that we can have, or that we can have really significant influence on. Yeah. Your example, I think, is interesting because I think where a lot of companies, organizations, teams, leaders can kind of trip up is they think, all right, this person's most important job is to close a sale. But the reality is, with how we do things, there's like 10 great sales moments, like sales closes a year. And I think oftentimes they hire those people and say, okay, this is what good looks like, just go for it. And then either the person closes or they don't. And then they get mad and they get upset. Like, why aren't you closing things? And are you doing anything that's useful? And the salesperson is like, well, of course I'm doing things that are useful. I care about this job. But there's just this disconnect. But if you follow this practice and you're using the tool, then what you can do when, in this scenario, you hire this person and say, hey, we've been collecting data for many years. And this is actually what EOS did for me when I became an implementer. They said, we've been collecting data for many years, and this is what works. Hand out traction books, which is like the instruction manual of EOS. Giving keynotes or workshops is really helpful. Picking up the phone and calling people and like going to different events where you're in front of business owners, those are the things that work. And They also provided me clarity on like the volume that those took to produce an intro, a discovery phone call and then a pitch that we call a 90-minute meeting. And so like that all was provided to me because they practiced the scorecard discipline. And that's the hope, So like in my early days when I didn't have clients or I only had a few clients, the way that I judged whether my week was good or not was how many traction books did I hand out? How many people did I talk to? How many events did I go to? And that's just so empowering to
So
people.
you've got something that you can measure and feel successful. I think that's an important part of work generally is you want to feel like, you don't want to feel fake about like I had a good day, but it's not really a good day. But you want to have something that you can point to and say, hey, it was a good day because I got this done. So we talked about sales a little bit. What about folks on the operations side where they're like, hey, look, our job is just to fulfill all the orders that the salespeople do. And sometimes the salespeople sell stuff and sometimes they don't. So what sort of a number is good for us? We just have to do everything that gets thrown at us.
Yeah, it's so dependent on the operation, so dependent on the company. There's so many different ways that you could take it. But, let's talk about like an example from the financial advisory world. And I think this can apply to service-based businesses. So a key part of a financial advisor's job is to make sure that clients are happy and that the results are being produced for them. A common practice in the financial advisory world is an annual review meeting with every client to go over their financial planning and their investment performance and answer any questions. So that is a key scorecard measurable that could be there. One that we measured was overdue annual client reviews because we had our client reviews, it was clear what month of the year those needed to happen for each person. I've got another financial advisory client that they do a lot of their own investment strategies, and a scorecard measurable for them is how their portfolios are doing versus the benchmark. And so they're able to see from week to week, are we better? Are we the same? Are we worse? You think about that, how valuable that is from a leading indicator standpoint. So they could see 2 weeks, 3 weeks in a row where they're below the benchmark. They can do something about that, as opposed to waiting for a client to call them 3 months down the road saying, hey, the last 3 months, my investments have not been performing well. What are you going to do about it? They have already seen that. That's another reason why leading is so valuable. By the way, one more thing that I need to point about the scorecard is a key part of this tool is we measure the last 13 weeks. It's a rolling 13 weeks. So we're always able to look back essentially the last 3 months and see how things are, what's trending in the right direction or wrong direction. That's really important. Obviously, you want to keep data beyond the last 13 weeks, but you see that every week. I think there's other good scorecard measurables, like depending on the volume of customers that you interact with or how many you have. There could be some sort of measurable around customer satisfaction. I've seen things like reviews, Google reviews requested, or they have surveys that they send out and they collect, what was the average rating or ratings below a certain level so that they can get on top of those things quickly. But I mean, we could have like a 5-hour
Sure.
conversation on every different industry for operations, but hopefully some of those are helpful.
Yeah, one thing, as you were saying that, you mentioned construction companies, and you're right. There's a lot of different industries, and a lot of the metrics are quite different. Some businesses have real capacity constraint problems in their business. If you're, I don't know, particularly like a commercial construction company where you do very large projects, you could be like super deep in a project for months at a time and you don't need any new sales. And then all of a sudden you get a new sale that comes to your door and you're like, wait a minute, we can't even start this new thing for 3 months because we're backed up. So, lead time is one that I think of that is um, definitely more of a metric in businesses that are potentially or currently capacity constrained. Some businesses who don't have enough demand, they're like, oh, yeah, we can pretty much get to any order every day. Like that's the ideal, right? To service the demand as it comes in. But some businesses have a little bit different challenge there.
Yeah, I've got so some of my construction clients, what I've seen on their scorecard is things like backlog, all the projects that they have contracts on, their estimate on, how long that's going to take them. And if you stack all those projects up, we're booked for the next 6 months or the next 3 months kind of thing. So that kind of helps them see. There's been some companies that I've worked with where they, because of their numbers on their scorecard, they're able to see that we have a bunch of long-term projects locked in, but actually the next month is very light. And so we need to go out and get work that needs to happen right now, short-term projects. I've also seen some great scorecard measurables on each week. They assess what projects are on schedule and which ones aren't, and they report number of projects off schedule or over budget so they can get on top of those things before the end of
That's
the
absolutely
project kind of thing. So it's just like, when you're thinking about operationally, the question is what are the things that our customers care about the most, and what can we measure that if it's not 100% leading, that will at least help us see down the road more effectively than maybe we have previously or than they're looking, so that we can see things sooner and get on top of them sooner.
the numbers that people have on scorecards sometimes will change. They'll say, "Oh, yeah, we had this number. We want to swap it out with that one." I'm assuming, or maybe have seen, like in the very early days of somebody implementing a scorecard, there tends to be a lot of turnover of metrics. Like, "Oh, we had this for a little while, and then we took it off." Could you talk to like how much the metrics change, like year one working with like EOS versus, let's say, year 4, 5, and 6? Do you see fewer metrics change quarterly or annually than in that first year?
Yeah, totally. Here's the truth. You ready for the truth?
Let's have the truth.
Hopefully, hopefully there's at least one person that listens to this and this is a challenge to them and they'll take it. So, yeah, for sure, at least the first, I think, 3 to 9 months of a company or a team developing a scorecard, there's lots of turnover and trial and error. And then once they feel like they've got it in a good spot, there's much less change. But here's the truth. The truth is that that's a strong word. There's quite a few that don't put in the work to get a great scorecard. I think that's true to quite a few EOS run businesses. I think it's true, generally speaking. Because it's hard. It's hard work to like really dial those in and really test them out and have the communication cadence to get feedback on what's working, not working. But it's so worth it. I mean, I compare the teams that I work with that have their numbers dialed in versus the teams that don't. They just kind of operate in a different sphere. They move faster and they can see things that the other teams aren't seeing.
That's so true. Are you struggling to ignite real change in your continuous improvement program? Firestarter is your field guide. Real stories, proven strategies, no fluff. Get it now on Amazon. And like you
Right.
said, like having the scorecard is a good way to point out some of the problems in business. So I want to, kind of transition from scorecard into, you called it the issue list. Issue, I like it because it's a generic word. In EOS terminology, what is the issue list all about?
Yeah. So issues in EOS are anything that we need to talk about. So anything that team needs to get on the same page on or solve. Sometimes when people hear issues, they think it's only for the bad stuff, but we define issues as opportunities or problems. The value of the issues list is, let's say we've got a team of 5 people, an operations team of 5 people. It's a list that all 5 people have access to at all times, and they can go in and drop anything on that list whenever they need. Something comes up, they have an idea, they're seeing a pattern that needs to be fixed, put on the issues list. And obviously, issues can be addressed or solved anytime. If there's something that has to like be solved now or today or tomorrow, then we need to go take care of it. But the issues list is visited once a week in that level 10 type meeting where the whole team comes together and they know that the majority of that meeting is going to be dictated by the items on the issues list.
Okay, so let's go to that level 10 meeting now. This is one of the things that I, even with limited direct exposure to the EOS program, I've heard about level 10 meetings. It's something that you see about this system. So tell us what a good level 10 meeting looks like.
Yeah, so I'll describe the pure level 10 meeting. And the reason why I say that is because the level 10 meeting is designed to be the best weekly leadership team meeting that you can have. As you apply the level 10 meeting to different teams in your company, there are things that can be adjusted, but I'll just describe like the out of the box meeting. So it's a 90-minute meeting. It's no more than 90 minutes. It happens weekly on the same day of every week. It starts at the same time, and you use the same agenda that I'll explain. And we've got to start on time and end on time. Those are really key to having a great meeting. I want to emphasize the same day of every week and same time. I love the analogy of the heartbeat. It's the heartbeat of this team or the company. As humans, if we have an irregular heartbeat or we don't have a heartbeat, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? And it's the same for an irregular cadence, a team that doesn't stay on the same page. Okay. So we start the meeting with 5 minutes of good news. We call it the segue. The psychological benefit here is that we start the meeting in the positive. We're able to celebrate some wins with each other. And we segue the sharing of good news, reflecting back and thinking like what went well, starts to bring our minds out of the minutia of the day to day and starts to see the whole thing. After 5 minutes of sharing good news around the team, we go into reporting only mode. So we spend 5 minutes looking at the scorecard and go line by line, item by item, and report on track or off track. And anything that's concerning or needs to be talked about, we don't address there. We drop it down to the issues list that comes later in the meeting. Then we go 5 minutes of our rock review where people actually read their rocks off and report on track or off track. There is, if the people that are listening to this, if their team that they're working on does not have a regular cadence of vocalized accountability, I believe they are missing something. It's one thing to like obviously never have accountability, but like even going into Slack and like saying this is on track, that's different than even being on a video call with your peers and saying I'm on track here or I'm off track. It's so valuable. Okay, so 5 minutes of rock reporting. And again, any concerns, we're dropping them down to the issues list. Then there's 5 minutes of what we call people headlines. And they are positive or negative headlines associated with any customers or any people on the team, any employees. So the value of that 15-minute chunk, so it takes no longer than 15 minutes, it can go faster. But we are looking at our most key numbers, our most key priorities, and our people, which are super important. And we're able to see quickly what's going well and what's not going well. And we're building our issues list or agenda for the remainder of the meeting. After the headlines, there's 5 minutes of to-do reporting. To-dos were action items from last week's meeting. So the commitments that people made to solve the most important issues are on that to-do list. And the expectation is you need to get those things done between meetings. And then after the to-do reporting, 60 minutes of the 90-minute meeting is spent addressing the issues. And so let's say that you've got an issues list of 12 items. You read off all the items and then ask the team, what are the 3 most pressing issues that we need to solve this week? And, this doesn't need to take a long time. Like if I'm operating a team, I want conviction on the team. So I want to be able to ask the question, okay, what are the top 3 issues? I want someone on my team to say, well, item 10 has to be discussed. And then I want to hear somebody else say, number 7 is really important to me. And then number 3 is really important. Okay, those are our top 3. And then you simply just solve one issue at a time. And then 5 minutes left of the meeting, you wrap up. I can talk about the details of how we solve issues if you want, but that's the meeting. So it's like segue in with good news, look at our most important things, report on did we get our stuff done last week, solve the most important issues, meeting's over.
And you mentioned the issue processing. I believe that's a thing in EOS too. Like there's a specific structure for solving the issues. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we call it, the official name is the issue solving track, but we call it IDS for short. And that stands for identify, discuss, and solve. And what we are identifying is the root cause. Now, there's some intricacies here. Sometimes issues that we need to address are simply updates, or we need some feedback from the team. And so that's essentially what the identification is. If I had an issue that was like, I have an idea and I want feedback at the beginning, I would say, I have an idea that I want to share and would love feedback, and I'll just take your feedback and run with it or whatever. By the way, the value of that is, how many times have you sat in a meeting and like a conversation starts and 15 minutes in the conversation, you're thinking like, what in the world is being talked about? And why, like, what is the purpose of this? Uh, but anyway, let's talk about how to actually process a problem. So let's say one of the issues is a problem. What I teach my clients is whoever brought up the issue needs to state it in one sentence. So this is not trying to figure out what the solution is in one sentence. It's what's the problem that we're facing. So an example could be, we've had 10 complaints on this particular feature in the last week. Like, that's a problem, you know? Okay, is everyone clear on what the issue is? Yep. There's something going on with this feature. We're getting a bunch of complaints. Okay. So then we go into identification of the root and we start digging into, okay, why do we think that is happening? And we could go into, what are all the complaints saying? And, the 5 whys experience, where it's like, why is that happening? Why is that happening? Why is that happening? And we're just wanting to dig as deep as we can. The objective is to truly find the root cause. Because, like, could the root cause be that there is a lack of process, or there is a process that's not being followed, and there are like multiple quality checks that did not happen for this feature?
Yeah.
So that's why. So if you solve that, then you not only solve the problem you're facing, but you're probably also solving a bunch of other problems, or at least future problems. So that's the idea. So like, most of this time in IDS or issue solving should be spent trying to figure out what the root is. If there needs to be research done in between meetings to figure out what the root is before we try to find a solve, that's worth it. And then once we find the root, the whole point of the discussion is to find a therefore what. Like, what are we going to do about it? So what I've found is, if you really get to the root effectively, the discussion often, not always, but often, is pretty quick, because it's like, well, so-and-so needs to fix the process, or so-and-so needs to have a conversation or a quick training with the team that missed that process. And that's easy. And then you can kind of go to the next one. So the key is, what's the root? And then what action can we take as a result?
So those issues, as you get through an issue, it sounds like that probably turns into one of those tasks or to-dos that you mentioned earlier that you're touching on in the agenda also.
Yeah. Yep.
Very
That's
cool.
where we
Yeah.
come.
It sounds like a very excellent system for continuously improving and making continuous some regular progress there. What are some of the things that you feel like people sometimes struggle with that system? Because, a lot of systems like this, they're always easy in the book, they're easy in the manual, but then meets reality and sometimes things get messy. What are some of the challenges you see?
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of things come to mind. One is, people just implement the system and the tools for the sake of implementing the system and the tools. They don't realize that every tool is designed to support a proven business principle that you need to be working well in your business. They're supporting universal principles that work. So like the level 10 meeting, the principle is, we need to be 100% on the same page as a leadership team, as an organization. So I like, sometimes I just see kind of like a robotic or go through the motions executing of the tools, as opposed to understanding that the reason why our meetings are so great is not only because this meeting's great, but we're aligned. And rocks are trying to get us aligned on the top priorities. So that's one. Every tool matches with the principle. Another one is, so this is my opinion. So Danny Toney's opinion. The entrepreneurial operating system was designed to help entrepreneurs get what they want from their businesses, but it's not a top-down thing. Like, the most basic level employee in a business, if they are given a crystal clear process with great training, with clarity on their most important number, with a team of people that fit the culture and are great at their jobs, that have a highly effective meeting, you are making that person's life better than if those things weren't in place. And sometimes I think EOS is done to people in the company as opposed to provided. Like, here are tools that are not only going to help the business and, of course, hopefully increase revenue and profitability, but this will make your life better as a professional.
Yeah.
And super passionate about that, but yeah, that's missed, I think.
I think that's probably an area where we have some real common ground. And I think with a lot of the work that we do with KPI Fire and with organizations in general is this idea of employee empowerment. One of my core beliefs is I think everybody on their first day of a new job, they all think like, I'm going to be great at this. This is going to be a great job. I don't think too many people, occasionally it happens, but most people don't take a job thinking I'm going to quit tomorrow, right? Every
Right.
once in a while you hear a story like that. But for the most part, people take a job, they think I want to do a great job here. And then after some amount of time, unfortunately, too many people end up disengaged and they end up not liking what they're doing and they feel disempowered. And usually it seems like it's like what you were talking about, like things are being done to them rather than, hey, this level 10 meeting or this issue processing track is a way for you to solve the problems that frustrate you, the things that are getting in the way of you achieving your goals. It becomes something heavy. So I think that's very much a common thread, that systems like this can really help everybody at every level, like, have a better day at work, know what success looks like.
Totally.
Let me ask you a question about the facilitation of these level 10 meetings, because I'm sure that so much of having a great meeting, somebody could follow that same script and do it in a very authoritarian, maybe dictator sort of way versus a very engaging, empowering sort of way. I'm assuming that as a implementer and as a facilitator, you're probably like teaching people how to facilitate. Do you recommend having like a specific facilitator role? Is it a particular person in the meeting?
Yeah.
How do you run that meeting?
Yeah. So we do ask them to pick a facilitator and to pick an admin who does the basic note taking or navigates the software if they're using an EOS software. So, yes, there are roles. We also provide some ground rules. So, tangents need to be called out and politicking needs to be called out. We define politicking as when somebody's repeating themselves over and over again. Those are some of the basics. The traction book has a lot of good tips on how to facilitate well. I'm obviously facilitating with the leadership teams that I work with in full day sessions, and I think they learn a lot from that. And then I observe a level 10 meeting for all of my clients and come in and give some pointers. Typically, the best facilitator is just somebody that's good at keeping the pace and asking questions and making sure everyone's talking and that no one's talking too much. Like, they feel comfortable just kind of directing the conversation flow. The reality is that if you just follow the agenda and the time allotments, you're going to have a pretty dang good meeting. But I do find that the teams that allow quiet moments regularly have better meetings because it's giving everyone time to process. The teams where it feels like everyone has to compete really hard just to get their opinion in, I mean, there's probably teams out there where that's the right solution because they're, a bunch of A-type personalities that process quickly or whatever, but I think most teams need that processing time. And the most effective level 10 meetings, they follow the rules, but more letter of the law kind of thing, So like I mentioned there's 5 minutes to report on the scorecard. Robotically, the letter of the law part of this is you need to read off your measurable and report on track or off track, and that's it. But the spirit of the law is we've got 5 minutes to look at this thing. So let's make sure that we can look at everything, like report on everything in that 5 minutes. But if there's comments here of like, we're really struggling getting the right measurable here. I think this is a problem. Can we drop this down? Or somebody could say, this number is on track and we had the best week we've ever had, by the way. You know, like little things like that just make the meeting like human and real.
Yeah.
And if they stay within those time allotments, it's a really good meeting.
You touched on a concept there that I think is really important for anybody, particularly learning a new discipline, is oftentimes there's a structure that you can follow. I would refer to this as like standard work. Like the level 10 meeting has a standard agenda that you should follow. And there's probably not a time when you would ever like throw that agenda away, but it's sort of like I had a conversation with another one of our guests recently about the difference between a professional athlete in game 7 of the world championship versus what they do in practice, right? In practice, they drill and they drill and they drill and they drill. And then in the game time, at the critical moment, you might need to do something that you wouldn't normally do in the drill because the situation called for it, right? Like, I think that's a good example of how we learn, and you learn through following a very structured discipline, so that when the situation calls for it, and you have the experience to recognize when it calls for it, you can deviate, in the right way.
Yeah,
That's very good.
I like it.
Well, this is very good stuff. I really appreciate kind of quick lesson in EOS, we might call it. I want to move into a section here I call the rapid fire. So these are just kind of some quick questions, top of mind answers on leadership, culture, business improvement in general. So the first one here is, the most important job of a leader is to blank.
Provide clarity.
That's a good one. Okay, do you have a favorite go-to problem-solving tool? Maybe one of the tools that you just mentioned that you turn to as the solution to most things?
I mean, IDS is great. There's multiple. Simplify. I mean, I think so. Part of, we've talked about data. I think one form of data, this is not rapid fire.
It's
I'm
okay.
almost done.
That's okay.
A really important part of data is like raw facts. So it's not just numbers. So I think short answer, I probably default to IDS just because that's my world, asking what's the root. But part of that is collecting real data. And then I love the question, what can we simplify here? What can we get rid of?
Awesome. Is there a book that you recommend?
Any book? Yeah. Traction, written
There
by
you go.
Gino Wickman.
I teed
Definitely
that one up
recommend
for you a
that
little bit.
book. Recent book that's really good. Shoe Dog. I just listened to that. That is a good one.
The Nike story, right?
Yeah, that was really good.
That's a good one. Okay, finish this sentence. Continuous improvement is
Joyfully never giving up.
excellent. Okay, do you have a favorite question?
It's a question that starts with why. If I have a good enough relationship and they're not going to be defensive, then asking why questions is my favorite about whatever situation, like it's why specific situation that we're in. Or,
And
what about this?
you said something there at the beginning of that I want to drill down on. You said if you have a good enough relationship with the person. So it sounds like there's times when that question might not be well received.
Yeah. Um, like Keith, the first time that we met in the weight room, if I were to ask you, if I were to walk up to you before even asking your name and like, why are you lifting that weight? Or why are you doing it that way? I think there's a level of trust that why questions are coming from a good place that, like I can ask my wife why. But I think if it's a newer relationship, I think changing it to like, why did you do that? Could be, what about the situation made you think about doing it that way?
Yeah, that's a good insight. I know that a lot of folks are curious and ask questions like that oftentimes because they're genuinely curious, but it can be one that can put somebody on the defensive. So I think that's interesting the way you recognize that. What is something that you are fired up about? What's something that you're excited or looking forward to?
I mean, the thing that fires me up, so it's not necessarily looking forward to, I just love when I come into my quarterly client sessions and somebody has a win. Nothing is better to me than helping good people do good things, like achieve what they want to achieve. I just like sends me right to heaven.
That's awesome. That's such a
Yeah.
good answer. It sounds like you found a good profession if that's the kind of thing that lights you up, right? Like you're in a good
Uh,
spot. That's awesome. Danny, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast today. Do you have a website or email? How would somebody get in touch with you if they wanted to learn more about the EOS or your services?
yeah. So my email is danny.toney, Toney, at eosworldwide.com. Or if you just Google Danny Toney EOS implementer, you'll see my website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us some insights on the EOS system and ways that we can implement that. I really appreciate your time. It's been great to have you on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it,
You,
Keith.
you bet. You bet. And for our listeners, if you would like to ask a question or suggest a guest or give us any ideas for episodes or content, you can certainly reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn also, Keith Norris. And this concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to add a comment, like, follow, subscribe on the social, and share the podcast with friends or colleagues who are as passionate about continuous improvement as you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change. This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire, the all-in-one platform for continuous improvement. With KPI Fire, you can align strategy, drive execution, and engage your people. So whether you're leading a team or driving enterprise-wide change, KPI Fire helps you deliver real results. Learn more at www.kpifire.com.